Punishments have existed for as long as we have, because the punishments we'll be talking about are not simple ones like jail time and fines. These are the real deal. History is littered with some truly horrifying examples of punishment that are twisted in their creativity and show that humans are more awful than we can imagine. Learn about all the worst of these in the latest episode of BigFactz: Worst Punishments in the History of Mankind. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notifications button below. Number 5. The Brazen Bowl. The Brazen Bowl was an artificial contraption made entirely from bronze and was crafted into the shape and size of a real-life bowl. Anyone whom the bowl's owner wanted punished would be pushed inside, then a roaring fire would be lit underneath, turning the bowl into an oven. The burning smell inside would be hidden by incense, and tubes would be put through the bull's mouth so that the screams inside would be heard as bellowing of an angry bull. Who would have created such an awful contraption? This story is very interesting. The disturbing device was said to have been created by Perellos of Athens, who traveled to Sicily in an attempt to win favor of Phalaris, the ruler, who was believed to be a cruel tyrant. Thinking that this cruel device would please Phalaris, Perellos expected a reward. He didn't get one, fortunately. Phalaris told Perellos to crawl inside the bowl and show if the sounds actually worked. But once Perellos was inside, the fire was lit. Then the screams started, except Perellos was right. The sound was converted to the bellowing of a bull. The tyrant yelled to the terrified Perellos, locked inside, "Let the music master be the first to play!" Which served him right, to be honest. Perellos didn't die inside the bowl. Instead, he was taken out and thrown from a hill to his death. Despite being sickened by the device, Phalaris kept the bowl and used it on criminals and traitors. Number 4. Key hauling. As everyone hopefully knows, that life on ships for pirates and Navy officers alike used to be really hard. The captain of the ship was a dictator, and the sailors toiling on board were not there willingly. Kidnappings and forced impressment into the Navy were extremely common. So punishments had to be devised to keep the men disciplined and far from rebellion. In the middle of the ocean, the captain and his officers were vastly outnumbered by the workers. Mutiny was a danger that could result in their deaths, so discipline was ruthlessly enforced in an effort to keep order. The captain's word was law, and he even held the power of life and death. The most feared of their punishments was the practice of key hauling. The victim would be stripped naked, have his legs tied, and then be suspended from a rope that ran under the bottom of the ship. When the cannon shot rang, he would be dropped in the water and dragged under the ship, across the body of the ship, and pulled up on the other side. It would seem that the worst that could happen was drowning. But no! The ship's body was lined with razor-sharp barnacles, and the victim's body would be cut up severely in many places. Chunks of flesh were carved off, and in some cases, limbs were lost. There are even accounts of men being decapitated during the ordeal. If the man survived the punishment, he would still have to treat the infections to many deep cuts he received. Did we mention it was near impossible to treat infections back then? The man's terrible scars would serve as a permanent reminder to him and other crew members of the consequences of disobeying the word of the captain. Number 3. The boats. You might think that the boats is not a very good name for a horrific punishment. However, the act is truly terrifying. In fact, it was a favorite method of punishment in ancient Persia and was designed to inflict the most amount of pain possible on the victim for as long as possible. In ancient times, death was an even more common occurrence and not a sufficient enough deterrent for children to not steal bread for their families. In fact, a quick death was seen as mercy. Because of this, it seems that those in power at the time dedicated a hilariously and terrifyingly crazy amount of time devising up plans to punish their enemies. The victim of the boats would be stripped naked, and his body would be enclosed within 2 small boats designed to fit together with his head, hands, and feet sticking out of the spaces. These boats would be nailed together, which would effectively trap the victim inside, who would then be force-fed milk and honey, as well as having a sticky mixture smeared all over his face, feet, and hands. He would then be floated out in the middle of a still lake, or simply left out in the sun. The sweet mixture would quickly attract swarms of flies and insects, which would cover the defenseless man's exposed skin, stinging and biting him, causing constant pain. Over some time, this constant swarm of insects would begin feeding on the victim whilst he was still alive, and the flies would begin laying their eggs inside the boats. The victims would be fed the milk and honey every day and have a fresh coat applied to the skin. Should he still have the gall to refuse to eat honey, his eyes would be pricked with a knife until he became more cooperative. It was this way that kept the victim alive for a very long time. Sometimes as much as 2 weeks passed before he succumbed to his injuries. This dying usually came from dehydration, septic shock, exposure, or multiple infections. One of the most popular accounts of this punishment being used is that on a young Persian soldier. This soldier killed a claimant to the Persian throne in battle and was rewarded by the king on the condition that he would tell everyone that the king had landed the killing blow. The soldier agreed, but at a particular banquet, he said that he was the one who killed the claimant. The king became furious, naturally, and decided to punish the poor guy by the boats. He suffered for a total of 17 days, which he laid awake as endless insects and worms buried themselves inside him, slowly eating him alive from the inside as well as from the outside. Finally, he died, and the boats were removed to reveal the horrible sight of his half-devoured body covered in feasting swarms of worms, flies, and insects. Number 2. The rat torture. It sounds funny, but you'll stop laughing soon enough. Actually, rats have a long history of being used as cheap torture devices to make victims suffer. During the 1500s, the Tower of London contained one particular cell that was called Dungeon of the Rats. Prisoners would be placed in a cell which was engulfed in darkness. It was located near a river. As the tide began to flow in, the hordes of rats which populate the bank of the river would rush into the cell, tormenting its occupants. Of course, the prisoners couldn't sleep under such conditions, as their flesh would be torn, not just because they were scared of rats. But don't worry, this wasn't the limitation of the creativity of the human mind. Or maybe you should worry. Rats are well known for their ability to chew through literally everything, even metal. And it was put to not so good use in history. A rat would be placed on the victim's exposed stomach and covered with a container. The container would be then heated, and as it got hotter and hotter, the rat trapped inside would begin to panic and seek out an escape route. For the rat, it had soft flesh on one side and hot metal on the other. You couldn't blame it when it started to panic and chew through the victim's skin into their gut as an escape route. The gnawing process was not quick, and neither the death. Incredible pain was coupled with the fact that a rodent was inside them. It was so awful that the victims would give out information in interrogations just by the threat of this torture. Number 1. The blood eagle. The people who've had the most cruelty attributed to them are the Vikings. They have long been portrayed as powerful warriors and explorers who treated their enemies with savagery. However, the blood eagle stands out in history as being one of the most disturbing practices used by the Norse. The blood eagle was actually a ritual killing in which the victim would be tied and held face down. Then the pattern of an eagle was made. The back would be cut up with a knife, and one by one, ribs would be pulled and snapped free from the spine. So a wing formation was made. Sometimes lungs would be pulled out and laid upon ribs. The victim would be alive until it suffocated to death. Some sources say that the salt would be rubbed into the horrific wound to increase the amount of pain. According to stories, this terrifying punishment was reserved for noblemen and was actually a very rare occurrence. And there seems to be only 2 mentions of this in the Norse writings. The Orkneyinga saga, which is the 12th century Icelandic account of the Earls of Orkney, speaks of blood eagle being carved into the back of an earl by his enemy. Whether or not blood eagles actually existed, it's still hotly debated by many historians. It is possible that these stories might have been misinterpreted or even wrongly translated. It would be worth remembering that these stories were written by, storytellers and were designed on purpose to be used as more of a entertainment than for education. No unbiased or lawful accounts of the ritual exist, and many references come from hundreds of years later from Christian sources, which may have been attempting to depict the Vikings badly. Which of these punishments was the worst to even hear about? Comment down below and we'll pin the best one. Like this video and share it with everyone you know. Subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. This was BigFactz, bringing you the best content on the internet. See you next time.